Okay, welcome back. This is the ninth program in our Accelerated NLP training series. As we continue now through our interventions, we're going to move on to anchoring. And why don't you turn to page 46 in your manual? But before we look at that page, I'd like to ask a few questions. How many times it happened to you that you communicated with somebody, maybe a member of your family, maybe your partner, maybe at work, maybe with your children, and you said something and then you saw that look on their face? And instantly it put you in a bad mood, or you go, what's going to happen? Oh my God, not again. How many times did you wake up in the morning and you were just in a bad mood? And you go, no, I don't want to be in a bad mood. I got a heavy day ahead of me. I don't want to be in, this doesn't work for me. I want to be happy. I want to be a energetic person today. I got so many things to attend to. And yet you were in a bad mood. Or you felt sluggish. And then you felt prisoner of your state. You felt like it was nothing you could do. Now, how would you like to learn something that will assist you to not have to go through that ever again? Regardless of maybe your child going, whatever, mom, whatever, dad. And before you would have just gone red in your face, and I go, nothing happens. How would you like to get that? How would you like to have a little technique that will teach you to, in a matter of 10 minutes, to not have to be prisoner of your emotional state that gets on almost like a flip of a button. Like somebody says something, you hear a sound, you see something, and boom, you're there. How would you like to not have to do that? How would you like to know how to avoid that in a very easy way? I think it would be useful, don't you? So let's look at page 46 in your manual. So what is this anchoring? What is all about anchoring anyway? Well, very simple. Anchoring is a process of stimulus response. What does that mean? That means that there is a stimulus. Could be kinesthetic, like a touch. Could be a visual, like a sight of a face, a typical face of somebody, a certain object. It could be a sound. We have a lot of auditory anchoring, a lot of sounds. That's why people who use alarm clocks, when they hear the sound of alarm clock, they wake up. Although they may sleep through other sounds, but the alarm clock is very important. Now, why do you think we have all those little tunes that accompany the slogans of different companies selling products? Like, what's the Coca-Cola song? So anchoring is a process of stimulus response. Something happens, there is some sort of a stimulus, and you respond in a certain way. The first person to notice anchoring was a guy named William Twittmeyer. If you heard of him, it was Bill Twittmeyer who first, and I think it was in 1902, realized that when he was a medical doctor and he would hit a patient on the knee for the knee jerk reflex, where he would use a little hammer, that the doctors have these things. So he'd hit the patient on the knee and he noticed that the knee jerked in a certain way. So in 1902, that's 14 years ago, he wrote a paper about the knee jerk reflex, which he presented to the American Medical Association. Now he noticed also something else. He noticed that if he told the patient that he was going to hit the knee and then hit the knee and did it several times, he noticed that sometimes in these conditions, before he would hit the knee would jerk. It's almost like anticipating the hit. That would sound like an anchor, don't you think so? Because it's a stimulus and a response. Anyway, he wrote a paper called The Knee Jerk Reflex, and he presented it in 1902, and I don't think it went very far. The docs at the time didn't pay much attention to this, and a lot of people in the AMA were really interested except from the hammer thing in the knee jerk. I mean, not much about that. But the notion of anchoring didn't get picked up as a result of others not paying attention. But a young Russian researcher named Ivan Pavlov read it, and in 1904, so a couple of years later, he presented his paper to the Russian Medical Society, and he called it stimulus response. And by 1904, he had been doing, a lot of work with dogs and other animals. And he was doing work with dogs and doing anchoring and doing stimulus response tests and woof woof, and the dogs would bark and the whole thing. Remember that thing, ring a bell and the dogs would salivate at the sight of the, show the dogs a steak. The dogs would salivate at the sight of the steak. So he would connect the stimulus, which was what? The bell, with the piece of meat. So that was stimulus. Dogs will respond with salivating and connecting that all with the ring of the bell. So in this way, he connected them. And so it's actually very well known that he would, do this work with dogs. And eventually he noticed, like Tweetmeyer before him, he noticed that he would ring the bell, the dogs would salivate even if he didn't show the dogs the steak. I mean, I don't think it was a steak, but it was a piece of meat anyway. So he noticed the same correlation as his American counterpart, only that the Russians paid attention. So he wrote his paper, he meaning Pavlov, he wrote his paper in 1904, and that eventually became the seed that will grow into what's called today behavioral psychology. Actually, in 1936, Andrew Salter wrote a really nice book called Conditioned Reflexes. And that's really a lot of the work in behavioral psych. It came originally from Pavlov. The interesting thing, however, is that we, in NLP, pick up on the idea of anchoring and began to notice that people are also subject to anchoring also, not only animals. So we also are very much subjected to anchors. So we're not calling it dogs, by the way, but people are subject to anchoring. How many, and I often ask this question, how many in a classroom, how many people were subject to an anchor today? Just pause for a second and think. Of course you have. And if you don't know, pay a little attention and you're going to notice how many times things happen around you with people, with sounds, with things in your environment, and you instantly respond. Just only when your cell phone rings that certain sound, certain tone, certain blink, and oh, that's Twitter, I received a new message, or oh, that's Facebook, or oh, that's whatever, or you have different sounds on your phone, and you oh, that's mommy calling, oh, I'm not going to pick it up. Yeah, so all of that, these are all examples of anchoring. And in a training room, when we ask this question, we have people raise their hands, of course, and they realize that we all are subjected to anchoring. So how many anchors are there? As I said, your alarm clock in the morning is clearly an anchor. You're driving along in the car and there is a stoplight. The red light of the stoplight is an anchor. It tells you, okay, this is the stimulus, the red light. What's the response? I press the brake and stop the car, right? Certain advertising slogans are all anchors. In fact, we can't even say, and this is a long time ago, Coca-Cola, you fill in the blanks. You're going to know it. Of course. We all do. What's the CNN slogan that's an anchor? All the news you need to know, right? That's an anchor. It's a sentence. But if you remember it correctly, if you watch CNN, and if you remember it correctly, it comes in on your TV screen with certain colors, with certain shapes, and with a certain sound. Now, all of that together creates the anchor. Yeah? So, of course, the phone is a massive set of anchors. It's funny to be in a crowded place and all of a sudden a phone has that particular sound and you see everybody checking their phones. Everybody's anchored and everybody looks and picks up their phone and digs in their purse or in their pockets and to pick up their phone to check, hey, this is my phone? So all these anchors, and behavioral psychologists believe that all our behavior is the result of anchors. Now, here we differ a little bit. We don't believe that our behaviors is just a result of anchors. That would reduce a human being to a very simplistic animal-like response behavior. But definitely our behavior is influenced by a series of anchors, that is to say, a series of conditioned reflexes. And so the behavioral psychologists believe that we're simply a conditioned reflex machine, and that the learning of new things is simply a matter of setting up new anchors and connecting new things with those anchors. Now, on one hand, they are right, because that really works, but there is something more to us than just anchors, and we will see this in the next programs in this training, and also we will expand on it massively during the Master Practitioner, especially during the values section, where we will see that our individual values are actually determinants of our behavior, far more than just a reflex response to an anchor. Now, we've learned the swish pattern. I'm just going back a little bit. I'm backtracking, in other words. A swish pattern, we've learned, is an example of doing a visual anchor if the client has his or her eyes open while you do the swish. You remember, lower left-hand corner, up on the screen. Even the sound could be cataloged as an anchor, right? So some people in NLP, not in our school, but other people in NLP believe that all NLP is actually only anchoring and reframing. Again, in our school, we disagree philosophically, because there is far more to a human being than just that. Some people believe that anchoring is one of the major parts of NLP. Yeah, it's a pretty good part of it, but not all there is. So anyway, let's do not underestimate the importance of anchoring, and let's talk about this. And let's look at page 46. Good. First of all, we need to talk about the definition of an anchor. Now, even if you take only the practitioner level in NLP, you still need to know what on earth is an anchor. So you need to know the definition, but especially for those of you who intend to take this program and go all the way through all the 3 levels and start utilizing NLP and teaching as an NLP as a trainer, you need to know the definition of an anchor. It's pretty much the same definition all over the world. So the definition of an anchor, it goes like this. Anytime a person is in associated intense state, if we apply at the peak of that experience a specific stimulus, then the two get linked together neurologically. An anchor, therefore, can assist you in gaining access to past states and linking past states to the present and the future. Now that's useful, don't you think? Let's say, and here is the practical part. Okay, we know all this. It's interesting. Oh, wow. Oh, I'm anchored. Oh, wow. But what do we do with it, right? So let's say you wanted to be more in control of your state. You really want to control your state rather than your emotional state to control you. That's a big deal, by the way. If you had a powerful resource anchor, we're going to talk about it in a moment, which would be all of the times, you'll be there anytime you need it, and you always could feel positive about yourself. And if you put it all stacked together into a big anchor, like a resource anchor, in other words, is a big stack. Imagine a stack of several positive anchors all put on top of each other in the same place, and creates this, my preferred way of describing it is like a big meatball of different anchors, all put together, but it's very powerful. And you can use that anytime you feel you're not in control of your state. I mean, how useful is that? Of course, it's really, really useful. You can fire off that anchor, and it will put you instantly in a positive state. And of course, the answer is that absolutely you could do that, and it would be extremely, extremely useful. Good, we talked about the definition of the anchoring, but let's see how exactly it works. You would remember our talk and description on page 7 in your manual. If you don't remember, just go back and look at page 7. That's the NLP model of communication. The title of the page should be the NLP model of communication. Now you remember that here is you, a person, and there is an external event that happens, but you may not have considered that that external event could also be simply thoughts that you have inside your head. It could also be internally triggered, in other words. It could be memories that you revisit or you think of, or something that happened last year and you play that memory inside your head. And it's almost like it represents a new input, if you wish, into your neurology. So let's recap for a second. We have an external event, but it could also be some sort of an inner or internal communication from you to you, or from outside yourself to you. Both of them end up inside you as an internal representation. You remember that. That internal representation is intimately coupled to a state. That's what we said. And that state, we're talking about an emotional state here, yeah? That state is intimately coupled to a certain physiology. Your body looks in a certain way. Now, anchoring takes place right here on the left-hand side of your diagram, in that package of the internal representation, which you remember, it's made out of pictures, sounds, feelings, tastes, smells, and also your self-talk. Yeah, you remember that. Now, that package is intimately coupled to a state, which could be a happy state, a sad state, a frustrated state, a motivated state, a joyous state, etc., right? And that's intimately coupled also to your physiology. You remember that. This is very important to remember when we talk about anchoring. So there is a relationship between the internal representation, that thing that you make inside your head, the internal representation, and the physiology, your body stance, how your body looks, how you hold your body. So there is this relationship between the internal representation and the physiology ends up being the state. Your emotional state. And the state is what we anchor when we do anchoring. I hope this makes sense because it's very important for you to understand. Of course, the entire package of internal representation, state, and physiology ends up in creating behavior. So you wonder why if somebody fires an anchor and you respond emotionally and without control, then you have a behavior that afterwards you go, why did I do that? What on earth just happened to me? Let's take people who are frustrated or resentful or angry or whatever, yeah? And they say things and they do things and they think in that moment it feels almost like you're powerful. But afterwards you think, what on earth? Why did I just react this way? What just happened? So you are actually not in control of your state at that moment. But the point of this is to apply this process that we're learning right now to become in control of the state. Because what we're interested mostly in is to be able to be in charge of that internal representation or that state and the physiology, all that package together. Now that's really powerful. Good. Now let's talk for a moment about what do you need to do in order to be in charge of your internal state. And let's go back to page 46. Very soon we're going to move on, but for the moment, let's go back to page 46. First of all, we need to understand what is it that makes an anchor an anchor. So let's look at the 5 keys to anchoring, because that's what makes an anchor an anchor. First of all, in order to create an anchor, the person needs to be, that's either you or if you're doing, you think of yourself, but most of you will work with other people, so your client needs to be in an intense state. Number 1, the intensity of the experience. If it's a meh, blah state, it probably won't work as well. The state has to be really, really intense. Number two is the timing of the anchor. And I cannot stress the importance of this point here. The timing of the anchor is vitally important. Because as you look in the diagram, just look at the diagram on page 46, you see a state that starts from 0. Yeah. First of all, we have, let's describe the diagram so you guys are really, really clear about this. So we have time on the horizontal direction, and we have intensity of the state on the vertical. So there is no state. And all of a sudden a state begins to grow. A state appears. And as it appears, it begins to grow in intensity, it grows in intensity, it grows in intensity until it reaches that point where you see there it's written peak. After which the state begins to diminish. It begins to diminish until it goes back and either simply disappears or another state comes in and continues the same thing. But the original state that we're working on goes up and then comes down. So far, so good? Good. So now let's look. See, when the state is very low to the bottom part, it's very hard, if not almost impossible, to notice it with your sensory acuity. If you look at the person, it's not on the surface yet. It may be felt somewhere deep inside the person, but it's not on the surface, so physiologically it's not easy to notice it. But as the state begins to come up, it comes a moment, and that's not far away on the state. If you look where the first vertical line is drawn, where it says there anchor on, it's not far into the state. It's not far into the states. Why not? Let's unpack this. This diagram here is what we call precision anchoring model. And if you understand this, you'll find it extremely, and I really mean extremely easy to anchor anybody, to use all of the anchoring techniques, and you won't have any trouble whatsoever. I noticed that from other schools of NLP, we have people that come to our trainings that are kind of unsure, when to anchor, how do I catch the state? No. None of that will happen to you if you really understand it, so I'll do my best to explain it really well. So you see where the vertical line, where it says anchor on, it's not very far into the state. Because we assume that with your sensory acuity, you notice what? What would you notice? A change in color, maybe a change in breathing, maybe a movement of the eyebrows, maybe a movement of the lips, maybe a change in the tonus on the face, maybe a change in the whole physiology of the body. Maybe the spine it becomes more straight. So you could notice all these things. When you listen carefully, when you think you notice a change, don't second guess yourself. When you think you saw a change, that's where you know that's the beginning of the anchor. All right? Very important. Good, so now we notice the first part of the state, so the first anchor on line is right there. Then the state keeps going up, and it gets to the point where it's written peak. And immediately after the peak, we have the other line that goes down, and it says anchor off. Now, why is that line there? Let's understand this one. Because in most of the NLP books or original textbooks, it says anchor at the peak. But let's look at the definition of an anchor. We just saw a moment ago the definition of an anchor, and it says, anytime a person is in an associated intense state, if at the peak of that experience a specific stimulus is applied, then the tool will be linked neurologically. But if we apply the anchor at the peak, what's the state going to do afterwards? It's going to go down. So it's going to recede in power and intensity. We don't want to get that one. We don't want to get that part of the state. It becomes milder and milder until it virtually disappears. what are we going to do if we anchor that? We want to catch the front part of the state as the state goes up toward the peak and let go of the anchor immediately after the peak when we notice that the state begins to go down. Therefore, immediately after the peak, what are we going to notice if we look at the client? That all the change, the shift that we notice at the beginning of the state begins to become milder and milder. Like if there was a shift in the color on the face, it begins to recede. If it was a shift in breathing, the breathing begins to go back to normal. If it was a shift in the whole body physiology of the spine or something, the client goes, okay, and you notice the spine going back to where it was before. So you begin to notice the receding state. And you notice that, of course, with your sensory acuity. You look at the client. Now, again, when you think you saw the state going down, you take your finger off the anchor, which means that's the moment when anchor is off. I'm talking about taking your finger off the anchor because during the NLP practitioner, we're going to learn how to do kinesthetic anchoring. Again, if you learn the process of how to do an anchor, and we do kinesthetic anchoring, we're going to touch the client on the knuckle. And if you learn to do this, you will know any kind of anchoring, and it's going to be very easy for you. Good. Let's come back to our diagram. So that's the moment when anchor is off. The time frame in between anchor on and anchor off is up to 5 to 15 seconds. Notice that I didn't say 5 to 15 seconds. I said up to 5 to 15 seconds. And I know for our students that translate this in Spanish or any other languages, it's kind of difficult to translate up to, but here is what it means. And if you understand what it means, then it's easy to remember and it's easy to translate. Easy to remember also for English-speaking students and also for all other students with different backgrounds. Up to means I'm going to do an auditory anchor for you. Let me show you first how not to do it, and then I'll show you how to do it. So this would be something that will not work as an anchor. Boop! Which means that would be the finger on and off for the duration of the sound you heard. This doesn't work. There is simply not enough time for the stimulus, which is your finger on the knuckle, to capture that state and make it a link. Imagine a link in a chain, a link. It has to link. So just the time is not sufficient. Up to 5 to 15 seconds means what? I'm putting the finger on the knuckle now. Beep, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, off. Now, that's an anchor. That's enough time. So up to 5 or longer. Now, how would you know how long would you keep your finger on the knuckle? Ah, good question. That is your sensory acuity that will tell you. Because you look at the client, you see the change in color, change in breathing, change in face tonus, maybe a movement of the eyebrows, maybe a movement of the lips, maybe, a full body spine physiology change. And you notice when that begins to recede, when that begins to disappear, a return to where it was before the state started to come up, and that's how you know. There is no button that you put, okay, here's the button and everybody does the same. You have to look at the client. But I have a good authority that you can actually do that. Because I have seen in my, 17, 18 years of experience, literally thousands of students do this very successfully. And so can you. It's not difficult. It's not complicated. It's actually very easy. Good, so that's about the timing of the anchor. Now we're going to the third key to anchoring, which is the uniqueness of the anchor. Now, I've been talking about the knuckle a lot. And knuckle is a pretty unique place. First of all, the nerve terminations in the hands area are very close together because our hands are very sensitive to touch. We can differentiate very small things with our fingers and with our palms and with our hands. Much more so than our back or shoulder area. So therefore, there are several reasons for this. It's much better to ask for to touch somebody on the knuckle because we shake hands with each other. It's socially acceptable to touch hands with another person. It's not so much socially acceptable to pet somebody on the shoulder or bump them on the back or touch them on the knee or something like this. So first of all, it's the social politeness and respectfulness for another person. Secondly is the issue of the nerve terminations which are close together, which means that your touch has to be in the same place with the same pressure, and that's number 4, which is called the replication of the stimulus. So first of all, the anchor has to be unique, has to be done in a certain way which is specific for that anchor. That's the word says it all by itself. It's unique. Yeah. And number 4, the replication of the stimulus means that you should be able to press that place in the same way with the same pressure again, and the person will go into the same state which was linked by the process of anchoring. That means replication of the stimulus. Of course, the number of times counts. The more a person is anchored in the same place, in the same way, in the same state, the more powerful the anchor will become. The mnemonic device you have here for make it easy to remember is I-term. I is from intensity, T is from timing, U is from uniqueness, R is replication, and N stands for the number of times. Good, let's see now how to do the process of anchoring. In other words, how to anchor a certain state into your client. Good, the process is described under the 4 steps to anchoring. First of all, you would have the person recall a past vivid experience, and for this, you are going to use the question that's on page 47, right at the top of the page. It says there on page 47, turn to page 47 now, state elicitation script. So how would you have somebody recall a state? Very simple. You are asking them, can you remember a time where you were totally, when you were totally X meaning whatever you want to anchor, motivated. When you laughed so hard you were rolling down laughing, if you want to anchor laughter. When you were the happiest in your life, the happiest time, remember that time, right? And it goes like this. I'm going to read now to you the script exactly as you should do it when you work with a client. Can you remember a time when you were totally rolling down laughing? God, you laughed so hard. Can you remember a specific time? As you go back to the time now, go right back to the time. Flow down into your body and see what you saw, hear what you heard, and really feel the feeling of rolling down laughing. Good. That's how you do it. Now, there are several things I demonstrated to you right now which make your anchoring work best. First of all, I demonstrated how to read the script. There are several things here. Some people will go into a state and remember a time very fast. You ask them, can you remember a time when you roll down laughing? And they go, yeah, God, it was so funny. In fact, one of Ted and mine funny memories is when somebody says to us, do you remember the dog in Men in Black? You know, I don't know if you remember the movie Men in Black. It was a famous movie, Men in Black 2, where the dog is in the car and listens to the song, Who Let the Dogs Out? That is so funny. The moment we remember, we really laughed out hard because it's really funny to us. Right? Maybe it's not so funny to you, but it was very funny to us. So we remember the time instantly. Now, other people cannot remember a time where they felt a certain emotion that fast. They take longer time. Well, I know I had a time when I laughed really hard. I'm sure, but which specific time? Let me see. Ah, I remember I was with my friends. Oh, yeah, right. Oh, now I remember. So it takes a longer time. That's why your script is longer. See, the script is rather long. It says, can you remember a time when you roll down laughing? Can you remember a specific time? As you go back to the time now, go right back to the time, flow down into your body, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and really feel the feelings of laughing so hard, right? Or rolling down laughing. But you don't have to read the whole script if the client goes into the state immediately. Because what do you want? Remember, we talked in the what. What is in an anchor? What contains an anchor? Is the timing is vitally important. Therefore, the moment you see the client go into that state, you don't continue to read the rest of the script, the whole set of questions, all the 3 questions there. You immediately apply the anchor. That's very important. Very, very important. Now, for people who take longer to go into the state, you have all this verbiage, all the 3 questions there. You read it all, and you wait for them to go into state. And again, the moment you see the state begin to come up, that's the moment when the anchor begins. You don't wait, because if you wait too long, by the time you're done with reading all that script, the client may be out of the state, and then what do? Whoops, you missed it. And that's not good. If you missed it, you missed it. Start again. By the way, there's no disaster. If you missed it, start again. Now, the second thing I demonstrated, which is very important, is that when I want to anchor a state like rolling down laughing in a client, I, the practitioner, remember a time when I was in that state. So I really feel like I want to laugh really hard. I remember just now, I remember the time when I was laughing and I feel like laughing, right? So I put myself in that state. Now, why is that important? Because you, the practitioner, are or should be in rapport with your client. If you're in rapport with that client and you, the practitioner, are in the state you want to anchor, the client, via rapport, will find it easier to get into that state. So you, the practitioner, are carrying the client in the state with you. Aside from the fact that the client remembers the state that you want to anchor. Before we move on, we need to remember also other things which are important for the first step here. You notice at the very top, under state elicitation script on page 47, there are some things that are written there which are important for you to remember. The best states to anchor are naturally occurring states. Keep this in mind. Put it at the back of your mind somewhere, because it will be very important when we discuss how to set up a resource anchor for yourself and also for others. So the best states to anchor are naturally occurring, meaning they are happening right now. Somebody, really experiences a state of laughter and laughs wholeheartedly. If you manage to anchor that state in the moment, that's the most powerful one. Now, that doesn't happen. It's not the incidence of that happening when you want it to happen are pretty reduced in terms of percentage. That's usually why we are using the second best possibility, which is, by the way, very good, which says next best are past, vivid, highly associated states. 3 conditions: past, vivid, highly associated states. So, which says, again, the client has to be in the state. If you're trying to anchor a certain state on a client that you look at them and you go, okay, I don't think the client looks any different from how it looked 1 minute ago, probably the client is not in the state you want to anchor. You want to anchor laughter? You say, do you remember a time when you really, really, really rolled down laughing and you laughed so hard, and the client goes, yeah, I do remember. Well, I don't think so. No offense to the client, yeah? If the client is in, I remember, it was funny, yeah. That's not roll down laughing. Roll down laughing is somebody really laughs really hard, almost like tears coming down a person's face. I don't know if you ever had an experience like this, but when we were children, we used to laugh wholeheartedly. And even now we see a funny comedy or somebody cracks a big joke or something really funny happens. Yeah? That's roll down laughing. So vivid, highly associated states. Least preferable, they don't work very well, by the way, are constructed states. So don't use those. Yeah? So that's all. We're talking about all of this in connection to the first step in how to anchor somebody. Have the person recall a past vivid experience. Now, step number 2 says anchor. I'm on page 46 at step number 2 under the 4 steps to anchoring. Step number 2 says anchor. Provide a specific stimulus as you see the state going up toward the peak. Which means the moment you see the state come up, the moment you notice a change, a shift in the client, the moment you think you saw that shift happening, you begin the anchoring process. You provide a specific stimulus. As I said, in our NLP practitioner trainings, we do a kinesthetic anchor, and we use the client's knuckles. I'm going to explain that in a moment. The client's knuckle to anchor a specific state. So which means you are going to put your finger, in other words, apply the stimulus on the client's knuckle as you see the state go up. Good, now you've done that. And the moment you see the state go back down, the moment you see the state begin to go back down, you take your finger off the knuckle, which means that's the time of letting go. That's the anchor off moment. Good. Number 3 says change the person's state. In NLP jargon, it's called break state. So you're just going to change the conversation, misdirect. Talk about, what did you have for breakfast? It's a nice day outside. Are you enjoying yourself so far? Do you think this is easy to do? And any change in subject would do. And then number 4, it says evoke the state, which means set off the anchor to test. What would you do? You will apply the anchor, put your finger on the knuckle again, and notice if the client goes into the state. If you've done a good process, when you put the anchor, the finger on the knuckle, when you set off the anchor, by the way, again, if you do boop, that's probably not sufficient. You have to hold your finger a little longer, up to 5 seconds. And if you've done a good process, the client should go into the state you anchored. You should see the client go into the state you anchored. And it should be undeniable. Not mild, not maybe, not I'm not sure. No. If you've done a good job, you should see a very clear change in the client state. The client goes back into the state you just anchored. The mnemonic device for this is RACE. Recall, anchor, change, and evoke. Yeah? So, in a nutshell, this is the whole big thing about anchoring. It's not difficult if you really understand it. And if you understand it, you'll be able to anchor anybody. The process, by the way, it's the same when you set up visual anchors, auditory anchors, or kinesthetic anchors. The process is identical. Since we're doing kinesthetic anchoring for our exercises in the training, and it's the easiest way to learn anchoring, actually, much easier than learning visual or auditory. It's very important to ask the client for permission to touch him or her before you do it. It's not absolutely necessary for the success of an anchoring, but you're not just going to go touch somebody without their permission because they look at you and what are you doing, right? So ask for permission, and the asking for permission works in this way. You say to the client, in a moment I'm going to do a process called anchoring. That will necessitate that I touch you on the knuckle. Is that all right? Is that okay? Very simple. You explain a little bit that you're going to necessitate to touch them, and you ask for permission. Then everything's fine. The client knows what you're doing. You know the client's okay, and everything works just fine. Speaking of the knuckles, I mentioned earlier that we need to discuss a little bit more about the knuckles. See, if you would be tempted to think, but I can anchor somebody on the shoulder. Maybe the client wears a shirt with a certain design where you can anchor on the seam of the shirt or on the certain pattern on the design or something like this. And be very precise, by the way, with the same place and anchor in the same location. However, what if the client shifts position? What if the client straightens his shirt? What if the client moves in the chair? And whoops, there goes your anchor. It's not precise. The easiest actually, and the most precise is to utilize the knuckles. That's why we do it this way, because we really want to make it easy for you to learn it. Now, one thing is interesting to remember here. Because in the 5 keys to anchoring, which, if you remember, we describe what does it mean to anchor somebody. What does it mean? What is an anchoring, actually? What is the anchoring process itself? One of the steps was called the uniqueness of the anchor. Yeah? If the anchors are really, really unique, they will last a very long time. And this answers the question that comes up at this time when people ask, well, how long does an anchor last? Okay, we do it that way. We have the 4 steps. We do it. I learned now how to do it, but how long does it last? Well, an anchor, first of all, lasts as long as it lasts. Speaking of the uniqueness and the knuckles, would be a knuckle a unique place? The answer is probably not. Why not? Because we wash our hands, we bump our knuckles, we shake hands with other people. So there is a chance that the knuckles the anchors on the knuckles actually, would be fired off unwittingly quite often. Now, the more you fire off an anchor, the more you have a chance for the anchor diluting over time, so it loses its power. But there is something we can do about this. Because we still want to use the knuckles as an easy place to anchor, and yet we don't want to lose the intensity of the anchor, so what do? Very simple, we transfer the anchor somewhere else. Now, how do we do that? We transfer the anchor somewhere else by firing off the anchor that's already set, while at the same time we have the client touch another place which is unique, like behind the ear, or grabbing the lobe of the ear, or holding the fingers in a fist very, very tight in a certain position, which none of the above the client would do normally. This would be unique places that won't fire off the anchor accidentally. Now, so I'm going to repeat. We fire off the anchor that's already set on the knuckle while the client touches another place. And the moment the practitioner lets go of the anchor of the knuckle, the client lets go of the other place, the touching the lobe of the ear or holding the lobe of the ear or something like this, yeah? And that's very simple transfer of the anchor from one location to another. And so we transfer it in a unique place, in a unique location, and so we prolong the time that the anchor will work, so it won't dilute over time. Of course, we can also amplify the power of that anchor by adding to it. Once we know we have an anchor set in a unique location, whenever next time we roll down laughing, or if you anchored another state, I'm talking about roll down laughing because that's the example I gave you, but it could be any other state like motivation. Let's say the client wants to add up motivation. The client finds himself really motivated to do something, and it's in that state, and then anchors himself or herself in the same place, in that same unique location, and which means tops up the anchor. It's like you're permanently pouring more water in a glass of water that's not full. And the glass is infinitely long, so you can add states on top of that so it becomes more and more and more and more and more powerful. That's simply how to top up the power of an anchor to make it really, really powerful. Now we're leading into how to create a resource anchor. Now that we learned how to anchor one simple, basic anchor, now let's see what we can do with this, because we can do much more. And I'm looking at page 47, the lower part of the page where it says states for stacking anchors. Now, what does it mean, stacking anchors? Stacking anchors, as I said, means putting anchors on top of each other. Imagine a bunch of pancakes on top of each other. Yeah, a bunch of them. Now, instead of pancakes, you have states. You have a positive, powerful, intense state. Then you have on top of it another powerful, intense state. Then on top of that, another powerful, intense state. And all of that will make will conglomerate, if you wish, together, and synergistically will create a cumulus of very, very powerful anchoring that will create what we call a resource anchor for the client. In order to create this resource anchor, we're gonna learn how to do stacking anchors. I'm reading now on page 47. To stack anchors, you elicit several instances of states and anchor them in the same place. The state chosen for a particular stacked anchor can be the same or different. Let's say you want to anchor only motivation. Very simple. You'll have the client recall 5 instances when the client was really, really, really motivated and put them on top of each other in the same place. Anchor them on top of each other in the same place. And then you have a very powerful anchor only of motivation. But here is the interesting part. Even if the client wants to be motivated, it works better if you add also other powerful states. And here we have some examples. A time when you felt totally powerful. A time when you were totally loved. By the way, love is a very powerful emotion. Don't kid around. It's not a mild, mushy type of emotion. It's a very powerful emotion. A time when you really felt you could have whatever you wanted. A time when you could have it all. A time when you felt really energetic, when you had tons of energy. A time when you fell down laughing. I like that one a lot. By the way, laughter, again, is a very, very powerful state. Extremely powerful. If you want to beat up a morning of blah state when you don't feel up to it, make sure that in your resource anchor you add roll down laughing. You won't roll down laughing, I promise. But mixed together with others, it will create that uplifting a state that will take you out of the blah, emotion. And finally, a time when you were totally confident. Of course, before you will attempt to do this with the client, you will have to check with the client whether the client felt these states or not. So these are some examples of states you could use, and they're very good, by the way. They are universally applicable, but they are by no means the only states that you could use for the client. Maybe the client likes other states. Maybe the client lights up completely if you anchor the state of joy or excitement or passion. All of those are very powerful states. But these are these 6 examples you have on page 47 are, as I said, universally applicable. Most people have a relationship to them. And so we advise you to use those first. So all these states, powerful, loved, a time when you could have it all, when you could have whatever you wanted, a time when you felt really energetic, when you had a ton of energy, when you fell down laughing, when you felt totally confident. All of those can be used for a very powerful stacked set of anchors. I mentioned briefly that you need to check with the client before you begin, which means what? You say to the client, okay, do you want to have a very, very powerful resource anchor that could could be useful. When would the client need something like this? Let's say you need to talk to your boss. You need to have a meeting. You need to have a family discussion. You want to be in a good state because you're just before closing a deal. In any kind of instances like this. And the client says, yeah, of course I would like to have, one of those resource anchors that I could fire and get into that positive state. This is okay, good. You say to the client, did you ever experience in the past a time when you felt powerful, totally powerful? Now, the client may object to the word totally. Maybe some people have never felt totally anything. Maybe some people don't have so much experience of extremely powerful emotions. Then leave out the word totally and replace it with the word really. A time when you felt really powerful. Now, the client is going to say, yes, I have that experience, or no. If the client says, I've never felt powerful, obviously you're not going to use powerful for that person. And exactly the same way you checked for all the other states. Have you ever felt, totally loved? Have you ever felt when you could have whatever you wanted? By the way, that's pretty common. We all experienced that when we were very young. Only when we grow into adults, we learn that we can have whatever we wanted, and that's wrong because we can have whatever we want. We just need to develop new strategies and new skills to get there. That's all there is to it. A time when you felt really energetic. Yeah, that's very, very common again. When you fell down laughing. Yes, that's very common again. When you felt totally confident. Now, again, if the client says, no, I never really felt totally confident, then say, have you ever felt really confident? Or confident? The client says, yes, I felt really confident, but not totally confident. Then he was really confident, okay? Now, if the client says, I never, ever felt confident, obviously you're not going to use that. I want to replace it with something else. We advise you to use 6 and no less powerful, remember, powerful, intense states if you want to set up a good, solid resource anchor. Now, I emphasize the word powerful, intense, highly associated also states, because here are some examples of states, although they feel really great, they're neither powerful, nor intense, nor highly associated. Like the state of inner peace. Boy, it feels good. It really does. But it's not one of those states that make you jump off the chair and go do things. Or a state of bliss. Some people who meditate and drop in the void, for instance, they experience this unbelievable state of bliss. But when you are in that state, you don't want to do anything. You don't jump off the chair and go, okay, I'm just going to go do this, and I'm going to meet my boss, and it's going to be great, or I'm going to have that meeting, and no. Which means it's not useful for this purpose. I'm not saying it's not useful, it's very useful, but not for the purpose of creating a resource anchor, and also, as we will see in a moment, not useful for collapse anchors, which is the next process we're going to learn. Okay, so we learned how to set up a basic anchor. We also learned how to set up a resource anchor by using the process of stacking anchors. Now we can do a little bit more with that. What we're going to do next, we're going to learn how to do the process called collapse anchors. Now, you need to remember one thing. Every single time you want to elicit a state, you will use the state elicitation script, which is in your manual on page 47. Let's turn now to page 48 and look at the process of how to do collapse anchors. So let's talk about the process of collapsing anchors. We'll demonstrate for you an exercise before we get done. You'll do together a circle of excellence, which is kind of fun, and that will come out later in this segment. But for the moment, let's look at page 48 at collapse anchors. Collapse anchors gives a person a whole new set of neurological choices, which means it's a process, in fact, is a process that allows a person to not experience a minor negative state they're having and gives them other choices. I'm using my words very carefully because it doesn't have the negative state disappear completely out of the body's neurology. For that, we will use the process called timeline therapy, which we will get to a bit later on. But collapse anchors allows the person to choose 5 or 6 even different other ways of reacting instead of getting into a negative state. Very powerful process and very simple to do. It doesn't take more than about 10 minutes, which makes it very, very useful. So why would you want to do collapse anchors? Very simple. Have you ever been in a negative state and you didn't know, you just didn't know how to get out of there, and you were in the same situation, and every single time you would get in that situation, you would just go into a negative state. Whatever the negative state may be, it could be something really minor, like irritation, like being bugged, like being confused, or something like that. Or even a major negative state. Here's a word of caution. For a major negative state, now what are major negative states? Anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt are the 5 major negative states. And we don't use for those major negative states the process of collapse anchors because we can get rid of them thoroughly with timeline therapy. Therefore, for collapse anchors, you can use any other states you can think of: frustration, jealousy, any other states that are of a negative nature that you experience, and collapse anchors is very powerful for that. Good. So collapse anchors, as I said, takes a person and gives him or her a whole new set of neurological choices. It's best used when a person goes into a state that they are not particularly comfortable with and they wish they did not get into that state. It is most useful when the person goes into a negative state which they wish they didn't go into the present time or in the current moment. It can also be used for phobias or other interventions, but again, traditional NLP could use collapse anchors for a phobia and have it disappear. I'm saying traditional NLP, meaning the original NLP as it's been developed in the 70s. However, we notice that for a intense emotion, like intense phobia is based on fear, so phobia is nothing but a very intense, illogical, irrational fear. The best process, the most gentle and the most thorough process to absolutely get rid of a phobia is timeline therapy, the phobia process. And we will learn that when we get to the timeline therapy section in our training. The collapse anchors is not used for a belief change. Why? First of all, because anchoring deals with emotional states. A belief by definition is not an emotional state, it's a belief. It's a series of words that make up a rule in a person's life. That's not necessarily an emotional state. Therefore, if you deal with a belief change, you will want to remember the process called changing beliefs with submodalities, which you learned in the submodality section. That could be useful. And also, again, for completely removing a belief with far deeper effects on the client's past, present, and future is timeline therapy. Good. So, the issue then comes up, which says, what state specifically would I use for collapse anchors? We already talked about the major negative emotions, which you will not use for collapse anchors. They are better left for timeline therapy. But any other negative state could be gotten rid of with collapse anchors. So let's see. On page 48, it says first, get into rapport with the client. That's a must. Before you can begin to proceed in doing any intervention, any coaching technique with somebody else, it's a must that you establish rapport with that person. Don't even think of beginning to do anything unless you are really in deep rapport. Number 2, tell the client what you're about to do. And you say, in just a moment, I am going to do a process called collapse anchors. You may have to explain a little bit what it is, just a little bit. That will necessitate that I touch you. Is that okay? So you get permission from the client. And once you got permission from the client, you move to number 3. Decide on which positive resource states, plural, are needed, and then decide on the negative state, just one, to be collapsed. Make it clear with the client which states specifically are involved. You got to be specific here. Hey, we're working on frustration as the negative state, and we have all the 6 positive states that we talked about on page 47 as positive resource states. If the client can have an experience of these states. If not, as we said before, you might have to replace 1 or 2 for other positive, highly associated, highly energetic, highly powerful states. Then you move, once you've done that, you move to number 4. As you elicit the positive states, get into each one before you elicit it in the client. Meaning, you, the practitioner, have to get into the state you want to anchor in the client. So a time when you were totally powerful. You need to remember a time when you were totally powerful. Don't begin to anchor the client in a powerful state if you feel lethargic. It's not going to work. Because if you're in rapport with the client's going to feel lethargy. It's kind of simple, right? So you remember a time when you felt totally powerful. You get into that state and then elicit it from the client. Number 5, make sure that the client is in a fully associated, intense, congruent state for each of the states you anchor. Again, if you look at the client and the client doesn't exhibit the signs of being into a associated, intense, and congruent state, regardless of the client nodding his head yes, if you don't see it, it ain't there. It ain't there. Don't fool yourself. Don't try to fool the client. It's either there or it's not there. And it's there when you see it. Yeah? So if the client doesn't go into the state, don't do it. Just say to the client, I don't think you're accessing that state. I don't see it. Let's try to remember better. So remember that time. And key here is the client not to see himself or herself in that memory, as many people will try to do. The client has to go in their body at the time, looking through their own eyes. That's why it says, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel the feeling of being totally X'd. That's how you assist the client to associate in that powerful, intense, congruent, associated state. Good, and you anchor all the positive states in the same place. This is number 6. The same knuckle or easily identifiable place. We'll use the knuckle. Number 7, anchor the negative state just once on an adjacent knuckle. Yeah? So use another knuckle for the negative state just once, after you have anchored all the positive states on top of each other. Now you have, what do you have? You have a stack of positive states on one knuckle, 6 positive powerful states on one knuckle, and you have the negative state just once anchored on another knuckle. Once you're here, you've done all of these steps, then you move to number 8, and it says, fire anchors at the same time until they peak, and the integration is complete. Now, how would you know this, right? You watch the client. So you fire both anchors, you press on both knuckles at the same time. And both states will go toward the peak. They will go higher in intensity, higher and higher and higher in intensity. And then you'll see the client go a little bit incongruent. You'll notice signs of asymmetry, it says here. They will usually exhibit signs of asymmetry until the integration is complete. What could you notice? You could notice an uneven breath. You could notice maybe some uneven movement of the eyes. You could notice an unevenness on the tonus or the shine on the face. You may notice the eyes move right, left, right, left, right, left. The client looks asymmetrical, in other words, in everything that you learned in sensory acuity. And that will calm down. After a few seconds, look at the client, you're going to notice that will calm down. The moment that calms down, it's the integration is complete, and then you will release the negative anchor. Take your finger off the negative anchor only, move to number 10, and hold the positive anchor for 5 extra seconds and then release. So you take the finger off the negative anchor and count 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, and release the other finger off the positive anchor. Then you will break state for a moment, of course. Hey, how you doing? How you feeling? Everything good? Oh, lucky it's a nice day today. Do you smell popcorn? Our favorite question, right? Good. And then test number 11. How do you feel about that old state? Now, the client has to say, I feel like either it's not there, I can't do it, I feel like I could do something else instead, I don't feel like I'm going to enter in that state, I don't feel like I'm going to access that state, it doesn't fire off, it doesn't tick me off, nothing, something like that, yeah? These are just examples. The client may say something totally different, but what you want a confirmation from the client that it's not the same way as it was before you started. And number 12, then your future pace. Can you imagine a time in the future when you might have be in a similar situation? What happens now? You can even ask, how is that different if you wish? And the client will tell you. And that's the whole process, folks. It's not very difficult. Just you need to follow the script precisely. Don't make up stuff. If you make up stuff, you're on your own. We don't know what results that you're going to get. But if you follow the script and you complete each step of the script correctly, as I explained, you will get the results. You will get the results you wish, and the old state won't bother the client anymore. Now let's talk a little bit about the possibilities of why collapse anchors wouldn't work. Because probably you made some mistakes somewhere. Let's talk a little bit about possible mistakes. Here is actually the only possibility, it's just one. Only possibility for collapse anchors not to work correctly. You need to understand what's happening when you do collapse anchors. Imagine again a stack of pancakes. It's a big stack of pancakes. And they are all nice yellow, golden, beautiful color. And then you see only one pancake that's kind of burned blackish on the side. And this will be a visual representation for those of you who love visuals of the positive states versus one negative state. Okay, so far so good? Now, when you press the two fingers together on the anchors, actually what you're doing, it's a simultaneous process. Collapse anchors is a simultaneous process of firing both anchors, which go toward the peak, and they peak at the same time, both of them. Theoretically, if you've done everything correctly, because you have 6 positive, powerful states, the negative state will be subsumed, literally it will collapse into the positive stack of anchors. Now, here is a possibility. Maybe before you began the process, the client says, oh, I got a little frustration, no big deal. But in fact, the client has a lot of frustration. Really, a big bunch of frustration, and the negative state of frustration, as an example, is really, really big. Now, if the negative state is really, really, really big, and the stack of positive states is not that big, what will happen? You will lose the positive stack of anchors, who will collapse into the massive negative state that you have anchored. So the process, instead of collapsing the negative state into the positive stack, you lose the positive stack. Oh my God, what am I going to do then? See, it doesn't work. No, that's not what you do. What you do is you restack the positive stack of anchors with more positive anchors. And you watch very carefully for the client to be associated. Put 10 states there, who cares? Put a gigantic stack of positive anchors. So indeed, the negative state will be subsumed. and do the process again with 10 positive states, and you're going to succeed. Yeah? That's the trick in becoming a great NLP practitioner. You will not go immediately, oh, see, I don't know how to do this. Oh, it doesn't work. Oh, no. You won't do any of that. You're looking at, okay, where did it go wrong? Let me do it again. Let me do it right. Because all NLP techniques work. As an observation, please remember, we never, and I mean never, yes, universal quantifier, we never stack the negative anchors for the process called collapse anchors. When we do chaining anchors, that's another story. We're going to learn chaining anchors next. But we never stack the negative anchors for collapse anchors. We have just one anchor, one negative state, and that's it. Okay? Now, if you want to see very clearly a visual representation of collapse anchors process, just look at page 15 in your slide set, and you will see it there. Another note to remember is that if the client wants to get rid of more than one negative state, you'll do the process again for each negative state the client wants to get rid of. And remember another thing, which is tuck it at the back of your head somewhere there, that collapse anchors does not remove the negative state out of the client's neurology. Timeline therapy does that, but not collapse anchors. But what does it do? It gives the client new neurological choices. It doesn't take away the choice of being negative, but it integrates these particular feelings along with the negative ones and gives them a bunch of new choices. And how would you know that the client has new choices? When you test it. When you test it on number 11 on page 48, there you see if the client really has another bunch of choices. Good. Now we're moving on to the next process that uses anchoring, which is the process called chaining anchors, which is in your manual on page 49. First question we need to ask ourselves is, why shall I use chaining anchors? Why couldn't I use something else? And why couldn't I use collapse anchors? And why should I use chaining anchors, right? So here is why and when to use chaining anchors. Chaining anchors is a technique that is used when the desired or resource state you want the client to be left with is, first of all, significantly different from the present state, far removed from the present state, and the present state is a stuck state. A stuck state presupposes the client's just in that state, doesn't move anywhere, doesn't do anything, literally feels stuck. Now, what are examples of a stuck state? Procrastination is a great stuck state. You know you should do something. You know you should begin on that project. You know you should wash the car. You know you should do this and that, but you don't. You simply don't do anything. That's an example of a stuck state. Raise your hand just for yourself if you never procrastinated. I would like to see a person that never procrastinated ever. Because in general, we all procrastinate here and there with different things. And there are people who are really great procrastinators. And they feel bad because they are procrastinating. And they wish they could get on with things. But they don't. So chaining anchors is a fantastic process to get rid of procrastination. That's why we're going to talk about procrastination today while we're learning to do the process called chaining anchors. Before we begin, let's specify very, very clearly the difference between collapse anchors and chaining anchors. As we have seen, collapse anchors is a process to offer the client different choices. Instead of accessing a negative state, the client has now 6 different other choices to act, which probably will take precedent. Chaining anchors is a process used when the desired resourceful state is far removed from the present state and really far away, and also the present state is a stuck state. Now, the difference between the two techniques is that collapse anchors is a simultaneous process, meaning you will fire both anchors at the same time. Chaining anchors is a sequential process. As we will see in a moment, we will fire the anchors one after the other in a certain specifically determined sequence. Why or not would you want to do chaining anchors at all? Oh, it's very simple. It's very simple. Ask yourself if you've ever been in a stuck state. Ask yourself if you've ever been stuck, felt stuck. And you didn't feel like either you knew or you could proceed. Now, that could be at work, or that could be in your family, or that could be at home, or that could be in your partnership, relationship, or that could be anywhere. You just felt stuck. Now, wouldn't it be useful to get out of that stuckness? Wouldn't it be useful to just press a button, a knuckle in our case, and all of a sudden, you do a 15-minute process and you feel unstuck? You unstick yourself, in other words, right? So how useful is that? How useful is this is to get your mother off your back, who pesters you all the time, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, and you go, oh God, here she is again, she's going to tell me again, but I don't want to do it. Or your boss who says, well, what about that project? When is it going to be ready? So, boss is going to be ready tomorrow. Tomorrow the boss shows up again and you still didn't do it. When is that project be done? And then you begin to be nervous. How much worth in getting this off your back do you think it is? I'm telling you, a lot. For your peace of mind and happiness, don't stay in stuck state. Just learn to do this little process. Oh, you'll be happy. Good, so what is chaining anchors? Chaining anchors is a simple anchoring process and technique. When we use it when the resource state is significantly different from the present state, and the present state is a stuck state. And you will use it every single time you or somebody, your client, is in a stuck state. We already know what anchors are. We already know that they relate to emotional states, not concepts, not beliefs, not anything else. We know what anchor. We know how to anchor somebody, how to capture a state and solidify that capture, link it with a specific stimulus. We have learned all of that. So what is for us to do right now is to learn how to do the process of chaining anchors, and you need to pay attention. We'll expand the script very clearly so you understand it, and by the time we're done, it will become easy for you to be able to do it. So let's go ahead. We are on page 49 at number 1, and it says there, first of all, as always, get in rapport with the client. Make sure you have a good rapport with the client. Number 2, tell the client what you're about to do. In just a moment, I am going to do a process called chaining anchors. Again, you may have to explain a little bit what that means. Don't get into too many details. The client doesn't know NLP. You do. And that will necessitate that I touch you. Is that okay? The client gives you permission, then you proceed to number 3. Identify the undesirable present state, for example, procrastination, and decide on the positive or resource state, which is at the end. In our case, will be what? Motivation. Instead of procrastinating, you want to be motivated to get things done quickly and be done with them. Get them off your back. Then, number 4, first of all, before you can proceed to do anything else, you need to decide the chain. You need to decide on what intermediate states are needed to lead to the end state. And you're going to ask the client, hey, Bill, you're procrastinating. What gets you off that state? What gets you off procrastination? Now, right here, at point number 4, design the chain, we need to talk a little bit. So pay attention now. In order to design the chain and decide what intermediate states are needed, you need to realize that not all people are the same. People are different. So therefore, you need to discuss with the client what states are useful for him or her as intermediate states. Because as you look in the little diagram there, we start from present state, state number 1, which is procrastination. Then we have to insert intermediate state number 1, which is in general state, the second state, yeah? which is marked 2 in the circle, and then another intermediate state, number 3, and then we end with the last state, the end state, which is called, in our case, motivation. Now, why are we doing that? Because the jump from procrastination to motivation directly is too far. Remember, we said that the states are significantly different from the present state, and the present state is a stuck state. Yes, procrastination and motivation are significantly different. So we got to put some things in between. It's like you are constructing a bridge with a few steps, with a different pylons in the middle, rather than just one end on one side of the shore and the other end on the other side of the shore. You are having some pylons in the middle to support this whole chain of anchors. Now, these pylons in the middle are necessary. Can you put just one pylon and have a total of 3 steps, the present, 1 intermediate, and the end? Yeah, you could. Can you put 5? So, total of 5 steps. The present state, procrastination, 3 pylons in the middle, 3 intermediate states in the middle, and the end state, motivation. Yeah, you could do that too, but here is why we prefer to do only 2 intermediate states, which brings us to a total of 4 steps, including the first, procrastination, and the last, motivation. If you do 3 steps, what can happen is that it may not work for a certain percentage of people, since the jump from procrastination to motivation the leap is too far, it's too big. So one single step may not hold our metaphorical bridge, may not hold the chain of anchors. It won't work, simply. If we have a 5 step chain of anchors, it may be too complicated and too unwieldy. It may be too much. For some people, they'll get lost and the chain won't fire correctly, it won't link correctly. We notice that a 4-step chain of anchors is actually extremely useful for a big majority of people. To be really honest, I am yet to meet a person for whom a 4-step chain of anchors that doesn't work. Except from people who cannot access states at all, who are not kinesthetic at all. No anchoring will work for such a person, of course. But for every person who can access states, the 4-step chain of anchors is absolutely best suited to do the job. Now, in order to be able to design the chain correctly, as we said, you need to decide with the client what intermediate states are needed. And in order to know how to think of that, you need to know what are the major things that are important in designing a chain of anchors. And these are called the criteria for intermediate states. First of all, you need to think whether the client moves toward or away from. The concepts of toward and away from are pretty well known. We all know what toward and away from means. It's simply carrots versus sticks. Some people are motivated more by carrots, some people are motivated more by sticks. Some people are motivated toward what they want, and other people are motivated to move away from what they don't want. Therefore, you need to discuss this with your client. What is the best state for the client to get him off procrastination? Because in general, the first intermediate state, so the one that comes after procrastination, could be either toward or away from state, depending on who you're talking to, who the client is. Example of toward state could be intense or burning curiosity. An away from state could be being terribly bugged or irritated or bored. Oh God, boredom. Terrible, really. By the way, Are you carrying with you like games or something to read on your tablet or iPhone or Android or whatever you have? Or are you immediately going on social media? It's terrible. You don't want to be bored. People hate boredom. They will just do everything they can to get off boredom. Boredom's a great example of an away from state. Now, for some people, it works as away from at the position of the first intermediate state. For other people, it doesn't, because there are some people who move toward. They don't move. Away from doesn't do anything for them. They love carrots. In which case, the first intermediate state for them would be a toward state. As an example, I gave you curiosity or desire. These are positive examples of toward states. So you need to decide, first of all, is your client moving toward or away from? Then the next criteria for the intermediate states is that wherever you are in the chain, the next state must have movement. Wherever you are at step number 1 or the second state or the third state, doesn't matter. The next step must have movement. Because if it doesn't have movement, the chain will not pull through. It will move. Let's say, for example, that the third state, which is called the intermediate state number 2, yeah, the third state in the 4 chain of anchors doesn't have movement. What you will achieve is your bridge will link from procrastination to intermediate number 1, from intermediate number 1 to intermediate number 2, and it will stop right there. It won't move further because it doesn't have movement, right? So pay attention to this, that wherever you are in the chain, the next state must have movement. Now, there are states that have movement. There are states that don't have movement. As a generalized idea, it's not 100% correct because there are many exceptions, but in general, we can say that states that involve being don't have movement. I just am. I am being blissful. I am being peaceful. I am being calm. They don't have movement. Any state of completion, oh, I'm done with this, I completed a task. It doesn't have movement because you're done. You're not doing anything about it anymore. You're just done. So in general, states of being don't have movement. I'm sure you will find exceptions, as I said, because I have, but in general, and states of doing or having have movement. Again, there are exceptions on the other side, but as a general idea, being, no movement, doing and having movement. Next criteria for intermediate states is what will be a sufficiently intense state to move the chain onto the next state. Keyword, sufficiently. You notice I emphasize with my voice. What will be a sufficiently intense state? Meaning what? Procrastination is state number 1. Now, meaning state number 2 has to be sufficiently intense to move the person off procrastination. The next intermediate states should be sufficiently intense compared to first intermediate state so the chain moves forward. And likewise, the last state in the chain, meaning motivation, should be sufficiently intense to move the chain from step number 3, from state number 3, to be the only person on the planet. Nobody else. Only you. I bet you'll never feel shame. Because shame can happen only in relation to other people. Which means it's not self-initiated. You understand? That's what it means. So all the states you are using in the chain of anchors should have the client originate all the states. If you are the only person on the planet, you could feel anger. You stab your toe, you go, oh, and you feel angry, right? Or you feel sad. A little bird that you like, was old and it died and you feel sad. Yeah, okay, fine. It's all self-initiated. But there are states that depend on other people, and I gave you the example of shame so you understand the process, and those absolutely should not be used in a chain of anchors. All the states should be self-initiated. Good. Next criteria is that the state should not be how they already do it. Right? Because if you use a state that the client already uses and they are still procrastinating, what are you going to do? Give them another way of procrastinating? You have to use something different. So when you ask the client, here at number 4, you are procrastinating, what gets you off that procrastination? They say, well, usually when my boss makes me feel blah, whatever they say, right? You're not going to use that. Number 1 is not self-initiated, is the boss. Number 2 is how they already do it. You're not going to use that. So you have to use a new state that they are not already using in order to be successful. And finally, the last criteria for intermediate states is do not use major negative emotions. Now, could we use fear or anger or guilt? Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. Here is the difference. Theoretically, yes, you can put it in there, you can make a chain of anchors. But we're going to let go with timeline therapy of all the anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt from the neurology. Now imagine this. You have a 4-step chain of anchors. I'm referring to the same diagram which is on the number 4 on page 49. State number 1, which is procrastination, intermediate state number 1, intermediate state number 2, and then you have the end state, which is motivation, making a total of 4 states. Imagine this. Let's say at first intermediate state, which is number 2 in the chain, you will use fear. Good, the client's afraid that something's going to happen and he gets off procrastination and gets things done. But now you do timeline therapy with the client, which you will do if you do a coaching session with the client, and you eliminate all fear from the client's neurology. Meaning you eliminate completely the second state from the chain of anchors. How's that going to work? Well, it's not going to work anymore because you break the links. You break the links in the chain. Therefore, do not use major negative emotions. You have plenty of other possibilities as intermediate states. So you got to do a little bit of a thinking process here at number 4 to design the chain. Again, it's not difficult. Just look at each and every one of the criteria. They are, by the way, in your slide set. Just look in your slide set. You're going to see the criteria for intermediate states. And discuss it with the client. Now, let's say you've done that and you are clear what are your 4 states. First will be procrastination. Then in the first intermediate state, you know what it is. The second intermediate state, you know the name of that state. And the end state, which is motivation. Now, let's say that we're still at number 4 at the very end. When you ask the client, you're procrastinating, what gets you off that state after everything we learned at this step number 4? So you suggest to the client one state. The client doesn't know. You suggest to the client one state. And the client, you see the client congruently say, yep, I'm sure that will get me off the procrastination. Absolutely. Or the client says, oh, no, I don't think so. Or the client will say, yep, that's a great state. I really like to get that state. That will get me off the procrastination. So you, based on the client's response, you will definitely be able to calibrate correctly whether the client moves toward or away from. You can suggest some examples of toward states or away from states, and see to which one the client responds the best. Now let's say you give the client several toward states and he doesn't respond at all. So let's say you're trying excitement. and you're asking the client, okay, you're procrastinating. Would excitement get you off? The client says, yeah, maybe. Or then you will try something else. You'll say, what about real intense desire? Would that get you off? So you're trying toward states. The client says, yeah, well, probably. No, that's not going to do it. You notice the tonality of my voice and the words I used, they're not congruent. What is congruent? So let's say that you may need to look at some away from states. So you might say to the client, how about excruciating boredom? The client says, I don't like boredom. I'll do anything to avoid boredom. Boredom, no way. That's a good state for the client. Again, you notice my tonality of my voice. And literally, me personally, I would do anything to not get in boredom. In fact, once I've done this collapse anchors for myself, when I took my practitioner, and I'm dating myself now, 17 years ago, right? I did the practitioner, might be 18 by now. Anyway, a long time ago, in other words, and I used boredom as the first intermediate state. I don't ever get bored, because when I'm about to get bored, I automatically, the chain of anchors fires for me. Automatically, that's at unconscious level, and I get motivated to start another project or do something else, so I don't end up bored. So for a person like me, boredom would be absolutely fantastic in the second state, which is what? The intermediate state number 1. So amplify, if the client says boredom, I don't want to get bored. Amplify, it says excruciating boredom. Yeah? So you can use this. As you think of the intermediate states, of course, we're mentioning this, but I'm sure you have thought of it already. The states should be similar, or if not the same logical type. Yeah? So, for example, a client who says to you, let's see, you say, what would get you off from procrastination? And they say, I think I'll get off procrastination when NASA announces the first man on Mars. Hello? That's clearly not even the same logical type as procrastination. I know I took a left field example. I went way out there. But you'll get the point. You need to evaluate if the client's answer is the same logical type, meaning it's on the same logical level. Does it make sense? Does it connect somehow? Or is it so out there? Remember one thing, and this is a generalization for all the techniques in NLP, including chaining anchors. You are the judger. You are the NLP practitioner. You are the one that understands some things your client doesn't know. So don't take everything that the client says and do it like a robot, because otherwise we will have robots do NLP with us. We have to judge from moment to moment, looking at the client and analyzing congruency. Is the client congruent? Does it make sense? As I gave my example with the man on Mars, it doesn't even make sense. It's so far afield on a different logical type that you couldn't possibly use that. So now that we discussed that, also when you keep in mind the criteria for intermediate states, you want to make sure that you have a bunch of examples. Start collecting a bunch of examples of away from states and a bunch of examples of toward states, and you can then suggest to the client one or the other, and you can try it on, see which one the client responds best at. Some examples of away from states include boredom, frustration, irritation, being bugged, confusion. Those are good. Example of toward state could be curiosity, as we said, desire, passion, determination, stuff like that. You move to number 5. Get into each state as you elicit and anchor each state separately, beginning with the present state through the end state. You will have to stack all states to get a high intensity. Let's pause here for a second. So first of all, as in all anchoring, you, the practitioner, get into the state you want to elicit from the client. So you remember a time when you procrastinated, and then elicit it from the client. Now be careful here, because if you're really good at procrastination yourself, you will be procrastinating to finish the process with the client. So now both of you will be procrastinating. So be careful, yeah? Be careful with this one. Just as long as you are aware of it, nothing will happen. I just brought to your awareness this possibility, so you know. Now you stack all states to get a high intensity, meaning what? You will have at least 5 instances of each state, which means you're going to have 5 instances of procrastination, 5 instances of the first intermediate state, 5 instances of the second intermediate state, and 5 instances of motivation, which you will stack on 4 different knuckles. It goes like this. Do you remember a time when you totally procrastinated? Do you remember a specific time? As you remember the time, go back to the time now, step in your body, look through your own eyes, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel the feeling of totally procrastinating. The client says, yes, you see the client go into states, you anchor it. That's 1. Then you say to the client, do you remember another time when you totally procrastinated? You repeat the process. And you repeat this process 5 times for procrastination. Then you're done with procrastination. Then you move to the intermediate state number 2. Let's say, for argument's sake, that it's boredom. Let's say you yourself get into the state of boredom, and then you elicit it from the client. And you say, okay, do you remember a time when you were excruciatingly bored? Do you remember a specific time? As you go back to the time now, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel the feeling of being excruciatingly bored. Good, the client gets into that state. Notice that my tonality of the voice, I really put myself in how I do boredom. Because when I teach this to you guys, I do it for real. Yeah? So when you put yourself into that state, you will sound different. You will be different because you'll be in that state you want to elicit from the client. Very important point. I know I'm beating the horse again and again here, but it's a very important criteria for the success in doing all anchoring. So you elicit boredom once you anchor it. Then you do it again, second time, third time for boredom, fourth time for boredom, fifth time. You got 5 instances of boredom all stacked on top of each other. As in now a little metaphor with pancakes, now we have 5 pancakes of procrastination on one knuckle. On the second knuckle, you have 5 pancakes of boredom. Okay? You repeat the same thing for the next intermediate state. Let's say that it's burning curiosity or what? Desire. Desire. Okay, desire. Do you remember a time when you desired something really badly? The client says yes. Now, remember what we said, the basic anchoring. If you see the client go in the state, anchor it immediately. Don't keep telling the script. Yeah, so watch the client. But let's say the client goes into the state of desire. You anchor it. And you do that exactly as I explained previously 5 times. So now you have a stack of 5 desired states on top of each other on knuckle number 3. Now you repeat the same thing at the 4th state on knuckle number 4, this time with motivation. Now let's say the client remembers 3 instances of one of the states, and then he says, I don't remember another time. Then you say, uh-oh, what do I do now? Because I need 5 instances. I need a stack of 5 states, and I got only 3. It's very simple. You say to the client, now, take the first one that you remembered. Let's do it again. And you do the first one again, and then you repeat another one. So now you have 5 instances per total. At this point, what do you have? You have anchored actually 20 states. 5 instances of each of the states that you are going to use in your chain of anchors. Now, let's go back now. I'm in the middle of number 5 on page 49. It says here in the middle of number 5, make sure that the subject is out of previous state prior to anchoring the next one. What does it mean? Once you finished anchoring the 5 instances of procrastination, you break state. Very important, remember this. You finished the 5 instances of the first intermediate state, in our example could be boredom, and then you break state. You stack the 5 instances of the second intermediate state, in our example we said desire, then you break state. And then you anchor the 5 instances of motivation, and then you really must break state. After motivation, you must break state. Remember this. If you don't, your chain of anchors will not work. You'll create a loop between procrastination and motivation if you don't break state at the end. And then you'll leave the client motivated to procrastinate. That's very serious, yeah? So remember. Break state is a must, especially after you anchor the 4th state, which is motivation, the last state in the chain of anchors. Good. Number 6 says then test each state. Make sure that the client goes into each one of the states. Which means what? You fire the first anchor of procrastination and you look at the client. Does the client go into the state of procrastination or not? Very simple. You see the client goes in the state of procrastination, yippee, you've done a good job. If the client doesn't, what do? You say, oh, doesn't work? No, you won't. What you will do, you will anchor more instances of procrastination until you see it. Good. Then you test number 2, so the first intermediate state, which is the second state in the chain. Again, you see, does the client get into the state of boredom? All right, I see it on the client. Perfect. Then you test intermediate number 2, the third state, which is intermediate number 2, the second intermediate state. And you see, does the client go into the state of desire, for instance? Perfect. You see the desire? Great. Good job. And then finally, you test motivation, and you must see the client go into the state of motivation. Now you're all set up. All the work has been precisely done, and now you're right at the point where you're doing the chaining process, which is number 7. Let's read together. Chain its states together, firing state number 1, and when number 1 is at its peak, you add number 2. Then you release number 1. When number 2 comes to the peak, you add number 3, then you release number 2. And you add number 4 in the same way. It says here this is not a collapse because the 2 states do not peak at the same time. So think of it. You are firing procrastination as in our example, and you notice the state go up. When you notice it at its peak, how would you know? You look at the client, obviously, right? When you see the client totally in the state, you put your finger on the next knuckle. And immediately, 1 second later, half a second later, it's just very brief, you release the finger of procrastination. Now you've got, what do we do? Boredom, yeah? Now you've got boredom. The second state goes at its peak. You see it getting, you see the signs on the client. The client's totally at the peak of boredom. You add the finger on desire and release the finger of boredom. So for a very brief moment, which is probably not just about half a second, right? Maybe less. 2 fingers will be on the knuckles simultaneously. But it's not more than that. Not more than that. This is why it's not a collapse, because the states do not peak at the same time. And so you've done 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. Once you release number 4, you can break state there, smell popcorn, get the client out of the state, and then you test. Now, how do you test? You fire the present state anchor, meaning you put your finger on the anchor which represents procrastination. And hold it there for, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. Maximum. Maybe you don't need to hold it this long, but just about this long. And you should see the client end up in motivation. Now, there are 2 ways of doing this. You're either going to see the client go directly into motivation. You fire the anchor and the client's motivated. Or you may see a gradual transition, a gradual change from procrastination as you notice the client go, as in our example, through boredom, desire, motivation. Yeah, you'll see these. These both are possible. I can't predict in advance, neither can you, how your client will respond. So look at the client and notice very carefully. You're going to see it. Once you've done number 8 and you did test, then the test shows correctly. At number 9, then you ask the client, how do you feel about that old procrastination? And the client should tell you, I don't think I'm going to do it, or something similar. And number 10, then you future pace. Can you think of a time in the future which, if it had happened in the past, you would have procrastinated? Tell me what happens instead. And the client will probably tell you a different action or something that they will do instead, or they'll simply say to you, no, I'm motivated to go do the project or whatever I need to do. So that's the process of chaining anchors. I admit that there are a few things, specific things that you need to keep in mind as the criteria for intermediate states. If you are not sure what they were, go back and listen again to this section. I promise you that once you understand them, they are not difficult. They are not difficult, and of course, nobody asks you to do this from memory. You will have the script, and you will have the criteria for intermediate states. So when you do it with your client, you will look and check and verify each step of the way. So it's not a problem as long as you understand why you do what you do and in that order. Now let's say that you are having a client or somebody you're working with, being a kid or being a teenager or being a young adult or being a mature person, or doesn't matter, in a matter of fact, doesn't matter who it is, who has a stuck state, but it's not procrastination. It's your judgment. You need to think very carefully because chaining anchors is particularly helpful for a stuck state, but it's your call and your judgment to recognize what is a state and what is not a state. We'll talk more about this and we'll discuss in the live training what is a state and what is not a state. It's enough to say for the moment that anything you can't feel is not a state. Is a concept, is a statement, is something else, but it's not a state in what we're concerned with during the anchoring process. And in general in NLP, when we say the word state, we mean an emotion that you can feel. So an example of another stuck state is I feel stuck and I have no options. The state is called stuck, no options. I am stuck. I am grumpy about it. I don't know what to do about it. And I really feel like I have no options. So these are really two good examples, very common, by the way, and of when you'd use a chaining anchors process. Now imagine that you master this process. By the way, if you do it 2, 3, 4 times, you're going to get the gist of it very quickly. Now imagine how would you look when you're going to be able to help somebody at work, or maybe you're doing business consulting or business coaching, or maybe even with the people in your own organization. Maybe you are a small business owner. Maybe you are a manager and you're working with your team of people. How are you going to look in the future when you are going to take the world's worst procrastinator and you're going to assist them to get over that? You're gonna look like an incredible magician or of some sort or some genius, right? Because after you do this process, the procrastination ends. It didn't recur. It's just a very simple set of setting up and designing a chain that goes from procrastination to motivation, or stuck no options to going for it, to motivation. And if you or yourself or you know somebody who gets stuck and they don't move and they're not going anywhere, do this with them. Imagine how good you're going to look absolutely incredible when you do this. It's not a complicated process once you learn it, and for that person, it's going to be a life-changing situation. Okay, good. So that was the process of chaining anchors. So we've taken a look at the process of chaining anchors. Now we learn how to do it, and we'll get a chance to practice this fully in the live practitioner training when you come and take it. If you want to practice on your own, please go ahead. Review this section several times to make sure you understand and you keep in mind all the conditions. And if you do, the process will be successful. In fact, this is such a powerful process that we are using it it's a preferred process for getting rid of procrastination, even ahead of timeline therapy. And timeline therapy is pretty much the process we're using most of the time. So very powerful process. I hope you enjoy it. If you get in trouble and you don't know what to do, or for whatever reason you are not successful with this process when you practice it, please call our office, call our coaches. We're very happy to help you at any time and give you suggestions and figure out how to make it happen. Good. Next is the New Orleans flexibility drill. So let's look at a couple of other processes that use anchoring, which we in our school no longer do so much. And I'll tell you why we don't. Although the New Orleans flexibility drill is a very good process if you look at page 50. So let's take a look. Turn now at page 50, please. Usually the process isn't used so much anymore because we have replaced it with the far more powerful techniques from timeline therapy. But in all fairness, the New Orleans flexibility drill is useful if you want to do it. And it's a 3-person exercise. Let's read on page 50. Number 1. Client identifies an external stimulus, could be a person, a place, a thing, or a specific syntax of external and internal processes involving any or all of these above-mentioned things that consistently triggers an unresourceful state in the client. Now, the practitioner anchors the client in several resourceful states, accessing the appropriate resources to successfully handle the situation identified in step number 1. Using the same anchor for each of these resourceful states, the practitioner creates for the client a powerful stacked anchor. The practitioner obviously tests the anchor. Number 3, the client provides a detailed description of the scenario identified in step number 1 and coaches the observer in the specific behaviors necessary to role play so as to totally and accurately reproduce the external stimulus. This means using verbal and non-verbal language patterns to recreate the external stimulus and may include the recreation of situations devoid of human interaction. Now, this is a little dry in terms of understanding, the verbiage in the script, and we didn't make the script. This is how the script came down from when it was created originally. So let's take an example. Ted has used this in the past with a young man that wanted to approach a girl but felt like he couldn't. So he just couldn't get close to a girl, to invite her to a date or something like this. He was really afraid to walk up to women. So in that situation, what you do, you put him in that situation where he might have to do that. And while he does, he imagines that situation, you fire off the positive anchors. And what happens is almost a sense of role playing. And then at number 4, it says here, the practitioner triggers the client's stacked resource anchor as observer begins to role play external stimulus. As observer continues to role play, practitioner intermittently releases the client's anchor, calibrating the client. If the client begins to revert to an unresourceful state, the practitioner fires the anchor again and again until there is no longer any need for the practitioner to externally anchor the client, meaning the client stays completely resourceful in a positive state. what has occurred now is that the external stimulus that previously triggered an unresourceful response in the client now instead triggers a resourceful response. For example, as in our case with the person that couldn't approach a girl because he was afraid, because the positive anchors were fired while the third person in the exercise, called the observant, pretends to role play that game. The client doesn't go into that negative state. The negative state virtually is collapsed into the positive stack of the positive states. So now the client triggers a resourceful response, and he can do the behavior he wanted to do, but he was afraid to before. So that's the whole process. Good. Now we have just a few minutes remaining on this program. Let's talk a little about the ring of power and the physiology of excellence. Let's do this together. So the theory is that we can adapt through the process of modeling, and we talk about modeling as we do it in the master practitioner training. Because through modeling, we can elicit excellent behavior. We see somebody with a wonderful, excellent behavior and go, geez, I wish I could do that. Well, there is a process by which we can learn from them, elicit, correct word would be elicit from them, their strategies, their values, their beliefs, and everything else. So their mindset, how do they do that behavior? And once we really understand it to specificity, then we can take it and install the necessary beliefs, values, attitudes, everything that the client has, install it in ourselves so we can be capable of replicating the same excellent behavior at the same level of excellence. Now that's very useful, and we do that together in the master practitioner. Yeah? So the theory is that anything you can do, I can elicit from you, and I can also do. And that's called modeling. So you can find and model excellent behavior and install it in someone else. Therefore, the ring of power is a useful way to actually install some sort of internal behavior or internal state with a person. Most successful people are generally in control of their state, no matter what the external circumstances are. In other words, they don't have a knee-jerk reflex, an automatic behavioral reflex, which is driven by an uncontrolled emotional response. In fact, they are so much in control of their emotions, not by repressing them. The repressal of emotions doesn't solve the problem. By letting go of negative emotions and being in control of the other emotions with anchoring, that solves the problem. So successful people, they are capable of staying in a positive, uptime, wonderful state, no matter what the external circumstances. So the process is going to be essentially to anchor a number of positive states on the client, and imagine a circle on the floor. Imagine a circle which is called the ring of power in front of you as a circle. It says they're about 2 feet in diameter. Now remember a time when you were totally motivated, actually so motivated, nobody can stop you. You wanted something and you wanted to go get it, and you did everything you could and you got there and you were so motivated. And then when you are in that state, step right into the ring. And when the state begins to subside, step out of the ring. Yeah? Now you can add additional states in the same way. For additional states, remember, go and look at page 47. You have the 6 examples of very powerful, associated, intense, positive states. So let's do this together. What do you think? If you want to, and this is kind of a fun, in fact, I think I can talk you through this. So let's see. Let's do this together. If you would please stop, and why don't you go ahead and stand up? Stand right up. Good. Go ahead and stand right up there and pick a place to stand where you've got a couple of feet free in front of you, so not behind a chair or a table or something like this. Make sure you have a couple of feet in front of you. And what I'd like you to do is to imagine a ring of power right there in front of you. When we call it a ring of power, imagine this as a circle about 2 feet in diameter. It's right there in front of you on the floor. Yeah? Got it? You could imagine it. You imagine it glowing brightly like a flame if you want. Yeah? Growing brightly like a flame, a fire. 2-foot ring of a circle right in front of you. And it's actually beautiful. Okay? Good. Now what I'd like you to do is to remember a time when you were, oh God, you were so motivated. Nothing could stop you. You could just go do things and you were just going for it 100 miles an hour. You knew you wanted something and nothing could stop you. Maybe it was that date. Maybe it was something at work. Maybe it was the new car you wanted. Maybe it was the new job. Maybe it was, I don't know, whatever. But something that was just so motivated. You were so totally in it. People were looking at you and go, gee, they're so motivated that time. Yeah? Got it? Got it that time. Good. Go back to that time right now. Make sure you see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel the feelings of being motivated, and when you got that, go ahead and step right into that ring of power. Step right into it, right there. Go, right now. Good. Very good. Now, when you begin to feel the feeling of being totally motivated, begin to subside. When you just begin to feel it subside, don't wait any longer. Step out of that circle. Yeah? Just as soon as you feel that subside, you want to anchor only the power. All right? Good. Good. Now, the next state we're going to do is the time when you felt totally powerful. Boy, you were powerful. I don't know. Maybe you ran and you were so quick. Maybe you went to the gym. Maybe you communicated to somebody and they looked at you and said, God, you are powerful. Or a time when you were felt really, really totally powerful. So remember the time. Remember the time when you felt totally powerful. By the way, the moment you feel powerful, step right into the circle. If you don't feel powerful yet, remember the time. Step into your body at that time. See what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel the feelings of being totally powerful. The moment you feel the power, step right into the ring. Just go ahead and step right into the ring. Standing like you would stand if you were totally powerful. Breathe like you would breathe if you are totally powerful. Good job. Good. Okay. Now when it begins to subside, when you feel it just beginning to subside, just go ahead and step right out of the ring. Step right out of the ring. That's good. That's good. Very good. Okay, now, let's remember a time when you felt totally loved. Or it could be maybe a family member, a parent, a pet, a partner in life, a child. Doesn't matter. A time when you felt totally, totally loved. Unconditionally loved. Yeah, that time. Now when you feel it really, go ahead and step right into that ring. If it takes you a little longer, remember the time. Go back in your body at the time. Look through your own eyes. See what you saw. Hear what you heard. And feel that feeling of absolute beautiful love. Again, good. When the state subsides, step out of the ring. Good. Very good. Perfect. Now, next is a time when you felt like you could have whatever you wanted. A time when you could have it all. Like, think of it. Maybe it was a moment in your life when you felt like you could have anything you wanted. Oh boy, that feels good. That's right. Go back to that time now. Float right down in your body. See what you saw, hear what you heard, and really feel the feelings of being able to have it all. Go ahead and step into the ring. Step into the ring right now. Good. Perfect. Doesn't that feel good? Yeah. And when the state subsides, just go ahead and step out of the ring. Good job. Now, how about a time when you felt really energetic? Really, when you felt like you had a ton of energy? I don't know, maybe you were in vacation. Maybe you were climbing a mountain. Maybe you were walking the park. Maybe you were playing football. Maybe you were swimming. Maybe you were playing with your pet or your kids, or who knows. Maybe you were at work and you're going for the sales. But you had a ton of energy. God, you had so much energy in that moment. That's the moment I want you to remember. That's the moment when you were just bursting with energy. You feel energetic all over. Good. Go back to that time. If you are already in an energetic state, step right into the ring. If you don't feel it yet, go back to that time, flow down in your body, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and really feel the feelings of being totally energetic. And when you got it, step right in the ring. Step right in the ring, right there. Good. Good. When the state subsides, wait until the state begins to subside, and go ahead and step out of the ring. Good. How about the time when you fell down laughing? How about the time when you fell down laughing so hard? You got it. That time, okay, just go ahead, wherever you got it, flow down in your body. And if you're laughing, just step right in the circle. If you're not laughing yet, remember the time and see what you saw. Hear what you heard and feel the feelings of totally falling down laughing. Step right into that ring, okay? Oh, that's silly. I'm laughing with you. It's so funny. I don't know why. What did you remember? But I surely remember something really funny. Oh, boy, oh, boy. All right. Okay, I hope you're in the ring, right? Okay, and when you feel the state beginning to subside, go ahead and step out of the ring. All right. I got to get out of the state myself. Okay, good. That was funny. All right, okay, welcome back. Good. Now, the last one we're going to do is a time when you felt totally confident. Like when you knew your stuff. Doesn't matter what it was. Maybe it was just as simple as cooking a dinner or selecting a restaurant or selecting a thing or making a choice or knowing something at school or knowing something at work or giving an advice or driving when you were driving. You knew the road. Doesn't matter what it was. But it was a time when you felt totally confident. You knew it. And you knew that you knew. Yeah? So go ahead and remember that time. And if you got it already, go ahead and step right into the circle. If you don't have it yet, remember that time. Go back to that time. Step in your body. Look through your own eyes. See what you saw. Hear what you heard. And feel that feeling of, I know it. I'm absolutely 100% confident. And when you begin to feel that way, step right in the circle. Yeah? Good. Now, when the feeling begins to subside, just go ahead and step out of the circle. Step out of the ring. Good. Perfect. Good job so far. So what we're going to do is we're going to test. We're going to test this. So theoretically, if you've done a good job so far, we got a series of states stacked right up. If you want to add some more states, you can stop the program right here and press pause and go ahead and add other states. But remember, they all should be powerful, congruent, intense, associated states. Don't add any blah states there. Just because you like the peaceful, calm state, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for the ring of power. Yeah, so you need to keep in mind the criteria. You can use peaceful, calm for something else, but not for this. So think very carefully about other states. If you want to add them, you're very welcome. Okay, now let's test this. If you've done a good job now, go ahead and step right into the ring of power. And go ahead and imagine the ring in front of you, 2 feet in diameter, and go ahead and step right into it. Good. And when you're ready, just go ahead and step right back out. That's good. If so far you've done a good job, when you stepped into the ring of power, you should have felt different. If you didn't feel different, maybe you didn't stay there long enough. So stay there 5, 6, 7 seconds. Count in your head, 1001, 1002, 1003, and notice, please pay attention to how you feel. Notice your kinesthetic. The moment you notice the change, you know you've done a good job. You should feel the collection of all these states, positive states put together. You should feel different. If it feels different, perfect. Congratulations, you've done a good job. Step out of the ring of power. Good. Now, let's see if we can do something with it. What you can do right now, imagine that ring of power, and take it and imagine you shrink it down, small, 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 and put it on one of your fingers. Just take it and shrink it right down until it's the size of a ring, really a size of a ring, and put it right on one of your fingers. And you can leave it there as an anchor, which you can access anytime in the future. Isn't that nice? All you have to do is simply take it off your finger, put it down on the ground, expand it, there it grows again, make it 2 feet in diameter, and once again step right into it. That's actually quite nice, you know? Very nice. So that's the ring of power, and with this, we are concluding our section on anchoring. And the end of the anchoring section concludes the 9th program in our series, the Accelerated NLP Training Series. We'll do more on anchoring when you come to the practitioner training and join us. We're going to have a lot of fun together. We're going to do a lot of practical applications. And next, we're going to move into strategy. So come back and join us for program number 10.